Well, here we are again, just a pre St. Patrick's Day. So, Joe, it's been a while. Thanks for wearing your green and your background here with your CXO Underground. So, what held you to keep that green? Is that the pack? Is that Packer green, or what kind of green? What kind of green do you have?
You could say it's Packer green, being a, ex-Wisconsinite. I still follow the Packers, not as much as I used to, especially after this year's loss. But it's all good. It's all good, Mike. What you been up to
Trophy's named
since?
after you. It's not too bad when the Super Bowl trophy is named after you for the winners.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
yeah. And I'm old enough to remember those first. First, I think the first championship I remember was the. I don't think they called it Super Bowl. It was the World Championship. And then they graduated to the Super Bowl. I think they won like three in the 1960s, way back when, and then it was really tough to be a Packer fan after that. So especially around all my bear fan friends and my Viking friends. And you living in Minnesota, you're sandwiched in between those two states, so you get a lot of grief. And man, we had some rough years.
hey, we got good food. Hey, you know what? At least you have fun tailgates and hang out with the family. How is Lambeau Field? Have you had opportunity to go to some games?
I've been there. It's an amazing experience. It's funny, it's a small town, and the houses are built right around the stadium, and it feels more like a college atmosphere. I'm sure you've heard that before, but it's true. And the players, are all from much bigger cities. I think they're shell shocked when they first get there, and you have these fans that are just raving fans that go to every practice and hang around, and they give kids rides on their bikes when they're rolling from the locker room facilities to the stadium, and it's just quite an experience. It really defines that city in a lot of ways, for
How did
sure.
they pick Green Bay compared to Milwaukee? Kind of, I guess from a person who's an outsider to Wisconsin, Milwaukee's a bigger city, right? So potentially, right? But
Yeah, I mean, it was a meat packing company. That's where the Packers come from. And
okay.
yeah, and there were a lot of football teams back in the day. Not a lot, maybe less than 20, right? And for some reason, they started in Green Bay and stayed in Green Bay. They used to play both in Milwaukee and in Green Bay for years. They'd not split. They at least play 2 or 3 games. They play preseason game, 2 or 3 games during the rest of the year. And it was many years ago, I think, where they stopped doing that. It could have been pre Brett Favre. I don't remember. But yeah, it was fun. I used to be a fanatic Packer fan, and I would have to make the family all leave me alone during Packer games, but I'm not quite that crazy anymore. So
Oh, that's good. Hey, it's a good way to start your week, right? To
yeah.
watch some Packer games on Sunday. So, with that, we've got a unique guest, somebody who I was introduced to by a SaaS entrepreneur who's doing kind of SaaS audits, automation. So it's kind of neat to see who that gentleman was connected with, and we were just talking about some CIO roundtables and CISO roundtables, some of the roundtables things that are going on virtually. And this gentleman we were introduced to, who would you mind introducing our guest for today, Joe?
I'd be delighted to. Jeff Tunn is here with us today, and I've come to learn that he's my brother from another mother. He's a speaker, author, explorer. He's published 2 books. He's one book ahead of me. I'm working on my second one right now. His first book was published in 2018. It's called Amplifying Your Value, Leading IT with Strategic Vision, which we'll talk about today. And his most recent book, which came out mid-year last year, is called Amplify Your Job Search. Both very timely, very appropriate books. I'm sure that, and if you take a look at them on Amazon, you'll see there are tons of 5-star reviews. So very worthwhile. I'm excited. I've already ordered them. He's the founder of the Indie CIO Network, where over 200 leaders meet to discuss technology trends. He's also an active member of the Forbes Technology Council. He just recently wrote an article around transforming your team on their cloud journey. He's also a strategic advisor with Intervision Systems. He's a fellow at the Institute for Digital Transformation. He served in many roles as a CIO, and most recently, I guess, it was CIO of Goodwill Industries, where he served for more than 5 years in the central Indiana region. And I think one of his most interesting roles, to me, was he served as president of 8729 Records, an independent music label specializing in hip hop. We're going to need to get into that a little bit.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And he's got his own podcast called Status Go. So check that one out. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, it is great to be here, Joe and Mike. And I've got to say, as you were talking about the Packers, that's another thing that we share, Joe, is my family's from Wisconsin as well. And in the room behind me is an autographed football autographed by Bart Starr. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
I've got one of those myself.
yeah.
Buzzy Thurston, Paul Horning, Bart Starr. Amazing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Lots of Hall of Famers
For sure.
for the Packers.
Welcome to the show. I mean, there's so many ways we could start the conversation. Your most recent book, I'd love to hear a little bit about why you decided to become an author, and just give us a brief overview of each of the books and sort of what your motivation was to write them.
Oh, sure. So I'd say I'd always wanted to be an author, and that probably came from my mom. She was an author, and I've just always enjoyed writing. So it was one of those bucket list items to do. I'd been blogging for, gosh, probably 8 or 9 years when I sat down to finally write Amplify Your Value. And that was really sparked by a conversation I was having at the Indie CIO network that you just mentioned earlier. I was talking with the group, and the question was asked, why aren't you more strategic? And I thought the answer was going to be, well, my business won't let me. They keep me kind of as a cost center. And the answer surprised me. It came back as, we don't know how. And so that was really the spark for Amplify Your Value. And that was really focused on the strategic thinking CIO who wants to align with the business strategy, develop a vision for what technology can be at their organization, and then build the strategies and the tactics to fulfill that vision and come to that vision. It was a lot of stories from some of my own experience, but also stories from other CIOs. The second book I wrote was Amplify Your Job Search, and that was not the book that I set out to write in 2020. I had started to write a book on leadership, leadership in unusual or not the famous leaders, but leaders that you've never heard of, right? And talk about their stories. But in March, I started to see the impact that the pandemic was going to have on jobs, and I figuratively put that book on the digital shelf, and I started writing Amplify Your Job Search. The first words I wrote in that book were on March 16th, and I just cranked through it to get it out, because in a good job market, not having a plan for conducting your job search can be tough to go through it. In a bad job market, it's disastrous to not have a plan or a framework. And so this book lays that out for the reader. And I love the writing process. You and I were talking about that, Joe, before we went on the air, that our morning times to sit down and just write and think and reflect and take some of those thoughts that are swirling in our heads and put them down on digital paper.
Yeah. I think one of the things that people imagine about writers is, that they're, I guess it's not so much that they're, introverts, but you do like to spend time thinking. And Susan Cain wrote a book called Quiet a number of years ago, and it really resonated with me. And I think that quiet time where you have time to reflect and do some deep thinking and write about your own experiences is really therapeutic. And I know I wrote my first book thinking it was just for me, my own therapy, but it's still selling 1,000 copies a year, which I'm always surprised by. My wife tells me not to say that, but I'm saying it anyway.
It is nice to see those numbers, and I even use that morning writing time for journaling. I'm a big believer in using the process of journaling as a leadership tool, because it guides you through that reflection, and then you can go back and look at what you've written, and it really helps you in your decision making processes.
Jeff, that's a great point. I think self-reflection is a sort of a secret, lever to pull as an IT professional. And so many IT leaders that I talk to and work with don't spend enough time thinking about, their own performance, self-reflecting on it. And it's such a powerful tool.
Yeah,
As human beings, it's just something we have that's unique and different than other animals. So
exactly.
it's something we just don't do.
Yeah.
Love to hear about how you found your way into IT. How did that happen?
By accident. So when I'm going to go all the way back to high school, and I'm an old dude, so that's a long time ago. The only thing I ever wanted to be was a rock star. And I spent hours playing guitar and writing music, and not really paying that much attention in school because I was going to be a rock star. In fact, I went to college to major in music theory and composition. And it was there I found out that you had to have talent, and I did not. So I was lost and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And around that time, you started to hear about the home computer, the personal computer coming out. And I ended up buying a Commodore 64. And I fell in love.
Mhm.
The fact that you could sit and type on that keyboard and get this machine to do things, assuming that you typed in the right sequence as you're writing the code. But I just fell in love with coding. And from that time for the next several years, I was working at a bank here in Indianapolis, and I spent every waking moment reading every book I could get on system development lifecycle, PL1 programming. That'll date me also. IMS databases, database design and theory, everything that I could consume. And I ended up getting kind of a lucky break in some ways, in that I was working for the credit card department of the bank, and they were going through a process of rewriting all their software. And I got assigned to be the user liaison on the project. And so I got to rub elbows with all these people that were programmers and learn from them. And eventually, the leader of that team brought me over, and the rest, I guess they say, is history, because I spent the rest of my career in IT.
Jeff, we have so many parallels in our past. I was introduced to technology by a professor that loved basketball. I played basketball in college, and when I retired from an injury, he said, you should really start, look at this software thing. And I learned Fortran. That was my first language. And then COBOL, which, it's still around surprisingly. But yeah, I started out there, and my first job was with what is now FIS, it was, with M&I banks at the time, and I was
Mhm.
building software for banks, and that's where I cut my teeth in the industry. But
Excellent. Excellent. We really are brothers from another mother, aren't
I
we?
know it's crazy, and we're both Midwesterners. I grew up in Wisconsin, and that's not too far from Indiana, and
That's right.
that's the same sort of mindset, work ethic over there.
Oh, you guys were coding. I was playing Zaxxon. That was my first game that I had with Commodore 64. That was our first family PC. So I
Wow.
do love the Commodore 64 as a favorite. So thanks for sharing that, Jeff. I don't know if that was a
Oh,
Midwest computer or not, but
that's
lots
awesome.
of lots of cool
Well,
Well,
games during those times.
we used to play Zork. It came like on 50 different floppy disks at the time.
You'd have to worry about scratching them because they had the cover on them, right?
That's
So you
right.
can
That's
kind
right.
of put them where you wanted to. So I think that was my parents' personal babysitter for a while. I just let him play the Commodore 64. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's funny. Well, I'm older than both of you, and my first computer was an IBM mainframe called the IBM 1130. Big hunk of iron. You could compile one program at a time. It could only do one thing at a time. No such thing as multi-processor back in the day.
Yeah.
So, and you
Yeah.
had your deck of cards, and hopefully you sequenced the deck, because if you dropped them, it was,
It was a
forget
mess.
about it. Now you got to make a bonfire out of the paper. But yeah, it was so much fun. Given all that you've been through, I'd love to kind of get you to talk a little bit about, what's on your mind and what things do you see and observe in IT? What has transformed and what's catching your attention these days?
Oh wow. I tell people all the time that I think today is the most exciting time to be in technology because it's changing so fast. And businesses everywhere, and the pandemic kind of sped this up a little bit. Businesses everywhere are realizing the role that technology plays in their organizations. And we have this great opportunity to not only drive the business forward, but revolutionize the business, transform the business. And so I spend a lot of my time uh, what I call changing the face of IT. And here's what I mean by that. I think the leadership skills that got many of us to the leadership role in technology organizations are not the skills that our businesses need today nor will demand in the future. And those skills are things such as a deep, deep business acumen, understanding how the business makes money, collaboration, communication, design thinking, systems thinking, critical thinking. And the other part of it is diversity. I think we need to drive diversity through the technology ranks because the problems that we are solving today and tomorrow are so complex that we need that diversity of thought, we need that diversity of experience. So I spend a lot of time talking with groups about that, thinking about those things, writing about those things, and coaching emerging and even established IT leaders on some of those skills. Because I think that it's just vitally important for the future of technology as a career.
Completely with you on that. I think I kind of call it the people-powered platform. It's where traditional silos are falling apart and breaking down, and teams need to collaborate in order to compete. I think the digital landscape has required that, and I think your point about diversity and inclusion is spot on. I think IT has been long dominated by white males. We happen to be white males on this podcast today, but it definitely, it's changing, and I think for the better. And I think, IT leadership needs to reflect the population as well. And I think it's going to take that sort of diversity in order to be successful down the road.
Yeah.
And so I think, one of the interesting areas that I think you focus on is with the Institute for Digital Transformation. Love to hear your thoughts around what that means to you, and it, I hear some people say that's an overused, sort of tired term these days. What's your
Yeah.
take on it from this point?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think everywhere you turn, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, everybody's talking about digital transformation. One of the things that the Institute is working on, and we hope to get this in public view here in the next month or two, is Digital Transformation Manifesto. Very similar to the Agile Manifesto or the ITSM Manifesto, but it's really our definition of what it means to do digital transformation. And I'd say to summarize it, it's a different way of thinking. It's a culture change within your business that you're constantly questioning the status quo. You're constantly thinking about new ways to do things. And it's more about that mindset than it is about any one technology platform because as I said earlier, technology is changing at lightning speed all the time anyway. So it's really more about that different way to look at your business and what things you need to do to surround your customer with your experience, to use that phrase.
Yeah, I think customer experience is the name of the game. And when I talk about digital transformation specifically, I talk about it in the context of not just the IT organization, but the rest of the organization. And
Mhm.
our responsibility as IT leaders is to hold the hands of the rest of the team, the IT organization and the C-suite down
Yep.
that digital journey so they can understand what's possible, what are the expectations, and how might they think about technology in a different way. And you can see
Exactly.
great examples of technology leaders, Elon Musk, and I'm really counting on him to come through with Starlink because I've got this off-grid property that needs internet badly. And hopefully that thing will start to show up in my part of the world. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, and that's fascinating. I'm really excited. When do you think the manifesto will show up on the marketplace?
Well, it's been in draft, so we've gone through several revisions, as you might imagine when you get a group of people together to talk about something. And these are people, I should add, from all over the world that have gotten together as part of the fellows of the institute. And we reviewed a draft of it about 2 weeks ago, and I think the plan, as I recall, is that we're going to put it out for public comment in April.
So for our listeners, viewers who don't know much about the Institute, could you tell us a little bit about how they got started and who's part of it and what the direction is?
Absolutely. So the institute was started, gosh, probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer than that. Uh, uh, Probably the person with the energy behind it to begin with was Charlie Arajo. And Joe, I know you know Charlie as well.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie wrote the book, The Quantum Age of IT, I think was the title of it.
Right.
I always tell him I'm a fanboy of his because I used some of that as I was CIO for a couple of organizations. I used that as part of my guide to that. But Charlie got together with a couple of other folks that had this idea of there was so much going on in the industry about digital transformation, and there really needed to be a group that whose mission is to provide some thought leadership on that. So they formed the organization, and then they invited several people to be fellows of that and help contribute to the messaging and help contribute. We all write blogs for that. Several members have written books about digital transformation that you can see on the institute's website. There's Dr. Frank Granito wrote a digital transformation framework that goes through the process of performing a digital transformation or an assessment to make sure that I guess it's more better stated a readiness assessment than a framework to make sure that your organization is prepared for it. So there's folks like I said from all over the world, Australia, England, Germany, United States, and I'm probably leaving out a couple of other countries as well.
Oh, it's great. We'd love to have you back on once the manifesto is out in the marketplace and just have a good discussion about its content and how people can take advantage of the information. Is there a membership associated with it?
So there's two membership levels. You can register for free at the institute and get the newsletters that come out. There is some members only content that is then fee based to join the institute, and I'm drawing a blank on exactly how much that membership fee is right
Sure.
now, but
Yeah.
that gets you access to additional content as well.
Great. I think we were talking about the pandemic and it's accelerating the pace of change and companies doing more online than in order to survive and thrive in this crazy business market that we have right now.
Yeah.
With the vaccines becoming more real. I saw some interesting stats. We're close to 20% in some states already.
Yeah. Yeah.
By fall, could be as much as 70 or 80%. What influence or how does that change how you think IT and business will sort of conduct business? Will we kind of snap back to the old way, or will there be, some sort of new hybrid version of what we're used to?
I hope not. I hope we don't snap back to the old way totally. That's a big topic of conversation with every IT leader that I speak to. It's what is it going to look like when we as we start to emerge from this? And so I spend a lot of time with them, as well as there's a future of work organization that spends a lot of time thinking about the future of work. And I think that we're going to see some sort of hybrid. Everything's going to be hybrid, right?
Yeah.
But what I hope businesses do is rather than just say, oh, well, part of the time you're going to be in the office and part of the time you're going to be at home. And I think that human connection is still so incredibly valuable. I hope businesses find a way that they reinvent the way work gets done. And what I mean by that is rather than saying on Monday, 50% of the people are going to be at home and 50% are going to be in the office, and then Tuesday they switch, figure out a way to make sure that everybody gets together at least periodically,
Yeah.
whether that's once a week, once a month, because I think that collaboration is going to be sorely missing. But the piece that I hope we don't go back to, and so somebody in the Indie CIO network coined the phrase. I don't know if he heard it somewhere or if he made it up, but coined the phrase pandemic mode. And it was really that accelerated pace of pushing through business initiatives during the second half of 2020, brought about because of the pandemic. I mean, you just look at the changes that happened in retail, just as one example. And so they spent a lot of time with their business leaders, and there's this newfound alignment between the business leaders and the IT leaders, and so much so that the person was relating the story that one of his constituents was saying, "Gosh, I hope we don't go back to pandemic mode. I hope we continue to." I hope we don't go back to the way it was before pandemic. I want to keep doing pandemic mode because we're getting so much done.
Yeah.
So I think we have to find a way to keep some of that momentum going. But on the other hand, I also know that uh, IT is exhausted after the last year
Mhm.
of all of a sudden being. I talked to a friend of mine that's a CIO out of California, and the way he tells the story is that before the pandemic, he had 400 offices that he was responsible for, and now he's got 14,000 because everybody went home.
Right.
And extending the network to the home computer, extending the service desk to the to the home network is just wearing people out. I wrote a blog recently for the Institute of Digital Transformation on is it time to disrupt the service desk, because we're using tools like remote desktop that are 20 years old.
Right.
Are there better tools out there to better support the remote worker? And I think the answer is yes, there are better tools. So
Yeah, it's a great point. I know in our part of the country, we're seeing an influx of new companies coming in, and we're one of the fastest growing technology markets in the US. And prior to the pandemic, you had big organizations like Lowe's and Truist, the combination of SunTrust and BB&T merging and building new structures here in the city, where these big monstrosities, and you kind of wonder maybe if they had to do it over again, they might rethink that real estate because
yeah, yeah,
I think I was talking to one of my customers today about coming back to the office, and they're making decisions now about, well, what's our policy about remote working? I mean, it certainly did work this last year, and we can't say no now. And so now there's this huge struggle on what to do. Um, what are you seeing out there in terms of what are companies in your network deciding to do in terms of coming back in? Are they going to have a robust work from home program continue on after the pandemic?
Well, I think what I'm seeing is it depends on the size of the organization, and it also depends maybe what industry they're in. So I've talked to a lot of tech companies because the Indianapolis area also is a growing tech, has a vibrant tech community like Charlotte. And so some of those companies have said we've gotten rid of our office. We don't even have it. We
Yeah.
use the pandemic as a way to not renew our lease, close the office down, and what they've done is they've rented some co-working space for people to use, but nowhere near the footprint that they had before. And they're just going to let their staffs work from home and get together every once in a while. On the other side of things, I've heard of some larger organizations that are, well, no, we're going to bring everybody back, and I think that's going to be met with a lot of resistance. if it's dictated that you have to come back. So, one of the largest employers in Indianapolis, who was also a tech company, is Salesforce, and they've said what they're not requiring people to come back to the office.
Yeah.
And they have their headquarters is the tallest building in our city. So I'm not really sure how that bodes for that tower.
Yeah.
Flexible lifestyle. I got a question for both of you, Joe and Jeff. So, Jeff, as I was looking at you're part of the Intel IT peer network, and you did a series on the path to CIO. And this was some of your articles were 2016 and 2017. And I'll kick this off to you first, Jeff. But what's the new path for a CIO? And the reason from my perspective is I'm not a CIO, but just looking at the roles from a Charlotte's point of view, there are some CIOs that have sunset in the last couple of months or the last year, and their roles haven't been backfilled. I've seen some change to CDO, the Chief Digital Officer, where maybe they kind of wear two hats, CIO and CTO. But what's the new path for to being a CIO from your perspective, Jeff? And are there any regional differences that maybe you're seeing in the Midwest compared to other parts of the country?
That's a great question, and I'll go back to something we were talking about earlier. When I wrote that series, I interviewed 12 different CIOs, and I was stunned how many of them their first computer was a Commodore 64. There must have been something about that device, but it was like 8 or 9 out of the 12 said they're Commodore 64. Anyway, I think where we're going to see the path change, and it's probably started to change a little bit, is I won't say that the CIO will come directly from the business as a matter of course. I still think you need that technology background, but I could really see CIOs doing stints in the business, in the line of business as a leadership position, leading a P&L, and getting that experience. As I mentioned, one of the things that I'm focused on in changing the face of IT is that business acumen. And it's hard to get that if you don't experience it. So I think we'll see some of that happen as we go on. I think the other thing, and this is Jeff's theory, is that we're going to start to see more verticalization in technology roles. It used to be, and still is somewhat, that when you ask somebody who's in IT, what do? They say, well, I'm in IT. And they feel like, well, if I code for a bank today, tomorrow I can go code for a retailer, and the next day I'm going to go code for a SaaS company. And I think what we're going to start to see is you're not going to be able to jump industries as quickly. We've already started to see that somewhat at the leadership positions at the CIO levels. Just ask any hospital who they would hire for a CIO, and they are going to require that they've had healthcare in their backgrounds. Yeah, right. And I think you're going to start to see that in other industries. So Joe, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, I'll just speak to my own trajectory as a CIO. And I think what really changed the game for me is I ran a software business unit for what is now a division of what is now FIS, before they bought M&I Data Services, Metavante, they used to be called. And we were trained as product managers. There's this organization called the Product Development Management Association. Mm-hmm. And we all got certified and we're taught how to think like business leaders, not like software engineers or technology leaders. And it was that experience which really spawned my first book, which is IT Business Partnerships. And it was really around thinking like a business leader and acting like a business leader and performing like a business leader. You said it really well, Jeff. And it's just understanding how the company makes money and understanding the marketplace and why is your product better than the next guy's, and what's the competitive advantage? Is it sustainable? What's the roadmap look like? What are you spending money on? All those things became critically important, and that catapulted my career. And I've known a number of CIOs that have been similarly minded, and those CIOs have always outpaced the traditional technologist.
Yes.
CIO leader. And I think where I completely agree with you is on many fronts, but especially on this business side. I think the role is becoming much more of a business leader with a technology skill set underneath. That's what I call the bilingual business person, business and technology. So I completely agree, and I talk about the old design, build, run model. I've transformed that into collaborate, integrate, orchestrate. Because that's the new CIO. That's what that stands for. And it's, you've got all the cloud platforms, you now have many, many choices. You've got to figure out how to work with your business counterparts, find what solutions map, integrate them, pull the information out. That's the I part. And the O is orchestrating, getting the value out of it, and then making sure that it runs, it's optimized, it's performing, it's protected. So I think that's our roles are going to be more along those lines, understanding the business and the strategy of the company, and then identifying what we can do to help move it along, and especially as it relates to customers, knocking down barriers and improving engagement, all of those sorts of things that we've talked about for years, but now are becoming real, I think. But that's my answer, my great question.
Well, in that role, for folks that are in that role, it's important to be with with the C-suite, just to, make sure that you're relevant and you're hitting the KPIs that that team wants, but also you go into individual business units. I saw a stat this morning. I was just doing my morning reading, and there was one that came up, like now the average enterprise has roughly 80 cloud apps that are in flight. With that, now that there's all this work from home, how are the up and coming folks that want to be CIOs, how are they going to get access to the C-suite that's going to tap them to be the next hire, as opposed to those teams going outside? I mean, Jeff, are you seeing any trends? Because it seems like you're pretty close to some staffing and talent acquisition type trends.
Well, I tell you a story from my own experience. I was this started the first CIO stint that I had, which would have been the early 2000s, and coincidentally, it was with a commercial real estate developer who built the NASCAR tower in downtown Charlotte.
Oh, nice!
So I was the CIO for that organization as that building was going vertical. Anyway, the practice that I started there and then continued into my next CIO role was something that I started calling ride-alongs. And I would find a business leader and I would go spend the day with them. I can remember when I was with the real estate developer, standing on the roof of a strip mall we were building out west of Indianapolis with the construction superintendent the day we rolled out the Blackberries. Everybody was all excited about the Blackberries, right? And we were trying to replace their Sprint push-to-talk walkie-talkie devices. We're standing on that roof, and it's July, and it's a bright sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. And lo and behold, he couldn't read the screen on the Blackberry because of the glare, right?
Oh, wow.
And had I not been standing there with him, I don't know that I would have fully appreciated the difficulty he was having as he was crouching down and trying to shadow the thing to read it. And so, I mean, that's just one example of seeing the business through the eyes of the people that are doing the work. Yeah. That one was a construction superintendent. At Goodwill, I used to do ride-alongs with the vice president of retail, and to be able to see the stores through his eyes. What was he looking for? What things stood out to him? How did he interact with our customers? To me, that was worth gold for leading IT, to be able to bring that experience back. And so I would encourage those that are aspiring to be CIOs or even current CIOs, look for ways to spend days in the business with someone. When again, using a Goodwill story, our senior systems engineer would spend time at the retail stores. And he completely redesigned the checkout system because of what he saw. And to speed up the lines, to get people through the lines faster. And we saw an uptick in sales per square foot, which is the major indicator in retail. Well, when everybody had brick and mortar,
Yeah.
and you know, he never would have been able to do that if he'd been sitting back in the data center with the servers. So you got to find time to get out, and if you're in a leadership position, I think you have to give your team time to get out and be with the business to be able to experience that.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I wrote a full chapter in my book called "Seeing is Believing," and that is really to the heart of what you're talking about. And I always, I have this pyramid of IT, and at the bottom is all the dial tone stuff that we do that nobody cares about. But if you don't have it, then all hell breaks loose, right?
Yeah.
The next layer up is the business, operations layer, where you're spending time in the supply chain with salespeople, seeing how they actually interact with customers, that sort of thing. And the very top layer is the external customer layer. And I have examples in my book where we actually did exactly what you did at ride-alongs, where we actually went out to see how customers engaged. I worked for Red Wing Shoe Company, privately owned company in the Red Wing, Minnesota, actually. And we visited, we had 600 stores. We'd go out and visit stores. And a really simple example, similar to yours, we were, all these stores were on our network. They all had inventory. And when somebody would come in looking for a particular shoe, a SKU, and it wasn't in inventory, the store manager back in the day had no way to search everyone else's inventories. And we were sitting there, and they were like calling and emailing people trying to find that particular SKU. And we were dumbfounded that we didn't think of this. And we ended up creating try to say this really fast, shoe search. Try to say that really fast 3 times. But we created that solution, and store managers thought we had invented sliced bread. It never would have happened had we not been there. So great example.
Yep. Yeah, that's a fabulous example. And I know you agree, since you put this in your book. It's almost the number one thing that I would suggest for someone as they move into a leadership role is to be able to see it with their own eyes.
Yeah, you don't have that same perspective. And one of the things that happens as a result, when you're in a meeting with the C-suite and you're talking about customers, you can actually speak from your own knowledge and experience, and it gives you credibility you'd never have otherwise.
Yeah. Yep.
So I learned that from a friend of mine who started the usability practice at Apple. And he, as software engineers at FIS, the precursor to FIS, we thought we knew how to build software until he came on the scene, and he taught us what user experience design was. And you don't build code unless you paper prototype and you do storyboarding. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And we realized how dumbass we were.
Yeah.
We were using hammer and chisels and rocks instead of modern day tools. So
don't you just start to code and figure it out later?
That's what we used to do. We
Amen. Yeah.
Hey, just shifting gears a little bit. With the pandemic and job seeking scenarios being so different in your most recent book, I'd love to hear your take on what things people should think about in terms of starting a job search in today's marketplace.
I think a job search starts with you. If you're going to attack a job search in this market, you have to understand who you are and what you do well. Especially if you're trying to find a job that is more than just a job. If you want it to be rewarding, where you feel valued, then to me it starts with your personal brand, and I talk about that in the book. To me, the personal brand are your strengths, your values, your passions, and your purpose. And if you can define those as you begin to search, and you make sure that all of your online presence reflects that personal brand, so that when talent acquisition managers are looking at you online, they're seeing who you are and what you stand for. As you're interacting with people in your network, then they're going to know who Jeff Tunn is, and they're going to know what he stands for. Because I think it's proven that statistically, 87% of jobs that are filled today have some attribution to your professional network. Somewhere along the line, you were introduced to somebody, or they made an introduction for you, or they made a recommendation for you, or they told you about the opening. And then the other number that jumps out at you is 80% of jobs are never posted publicly. The only way to find them is through your network. And so if you have your personal brand and you know who you are and what you're looking for, you can then communicate that effectively to your network. So when you're having a conversation with Mike and you say, Mike, this is what I'm looking for in my next job, when he hears about a job that aligns with that, he's going to think of you and say, hey, Jeff, I just heard about an opening at XYZ company. You should check into that.
Mhm.
And so I think it builds on itself through the process.
It's a great point. I think, I get advice or ask advice of people who say, look, I'm in trouble. I need to find a new job. Where do I start? And that's the first time they thought about their personal brand.
Yeah.
You should have
Yeah.
started like 10 years ago, not
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Hey, better late than never.
Exactly.
Well, Jeff, in regards to being in sales myself, there's a sales leader out there who's pretty popular that mentioned that sales is a contact sport, but so is finding a job, right? It is a sales
It
role.
is.
You're trying
Yeah.
to, so it very much is a contact sport. Doesn't matter if they know or don't know, but just, it's weird how that energy that goes out, just kind of planting those seeds that
Yep.
if you're not making contact, nobody's going to know, right? So
Yeah.
you got to figure it out and get the energy moving the right way. Or I guess if you go to, was it Newton? Once the energy starts, it's always going, right? So, once in a flight, always a flight. So, again, lots of opportunity there. Lastly, what are you seeing? Joe and I have been doing a lot around cyber and cybersecurity. Sometimes that could be the shiny car on the street because we just bought that shiny car, right? You kind of notice it a lot. What are you seeing in regards to cybersecurity?
Well, one of the interesting things that I'm starting to see, I've talked to a couple of companies in the last year where you're now starting to see AI solutions come into the technology, the cyber technologies, because and your listeners know that the log files anymore are just huge, and AI and machine learning was born to handle volumes and volumes of data and be able to separate that signal from the noise. And so I think, to me, that's probably the most interesting advance that I've seen in the last year or so in cybersecurity is bringing those technologies to understanding what is happening. Is it important? Do I need to worry about it? Do I need to escalate? Do I need to put human eyes on it? And I think you're going to start to see more and more tools incorporate that in.
What do you see in regards to change in leadership? CIOs, go back 5-10 years for the medium-sized businesses and down. The large enterprise, especially if they're in highly compliant networks, they had heads of cybersecurity. But it seems like today there's more and more direct teammates that are being hired in cyber. What trends are you seeing, in the Midwest?
Well, I think more companies, I think it's going down the enterprise stack, right? Even into the SMB space, more companies are identifying the need that they need someone in charge of cybersecurity. Whether they have the title CISO or not, they're starting to see that you've got to separate the CIO and the security aspects of it, just so you've got some controls that are separated. And whether these smaller companies are hiring fractional security officers or whether they can afford to hire a full-time probably depends on the size of the organization. But I think that's a trend. At least that's what we're seeing here. We just can't train security professionals fast enough here in the Midwest. I'm sure it's very similar with you guys there in North Carolina, that the schools can't churn them out fast enough because there's just such a demand. And now with the pandemic and the attacks that have ramped up, I forget the statistics. I was reading them the other day. Some tripling in the number of ransomware attacks and phishing attacks because the employees now sitting at home.
Yeah.
So I think you're starting to see the schools trying to catch up with that demand.
You hit that AI right in the head, and the employment factor. There's a large company here in town that they couldn't find people fast enough. This is pre-COVID, and I want to say they built up to like 40 people, just their own kind of self-training, because they couldn't get it done fast enough the way that they needed it for their business, right? And
Yeah.
it's just changing so fast. But yeah, the AI part of it. I mean, Joe, what are your thoughts around Jeff's comments?
Oh, absolutely. I just recently wrote an article for Martha Heller on this very topic, and I think AI and machine learning are really becoming more mainstream, and there are many very viable solutions that I think will have some sort of an influence on the demand for cybersecurity professionals. Not completely diminish it, but I think you'll have more choices as a business where you can actually buy security operations center in a box, or a SIM in a box, and you don't necessarily have to go do staffing on your own. The other thing I'd say is I'm seeing in the companies that I'm talking to, at least I'm trying to elevate the conversation to enterprise risk, not just cyber. Because it's not, to your point, Jeff, it's a team sport. It's not an IT thing anymore. It's something that's got to be incorporated into everyone's thinking. It's part of digital transformation in my mind.
Yeah.
The C-suite has to start caring and paying attention to it. Privacy comes in now, that you've got a bunch of different states with their own privacy laws.
Virginia, just named
Virginia, California, Washington, Texas, New York. I imagine the federal government at some point will say, wait a minute, we should really unify this. Well, of course, who knows with our federal government? What's
Skynet. I know Skynet. I mean, maybe they'll put that one together. So, Terminator days, right? So, well, with that, Jeff, Joe, any final comments, questions before we wrap up today's show?
Well, I just want to extend my thanks to you, Jeff, for coming on. And I imagine this won't be the last conversation we have. We have a lot in common, and I will definitely look to have more with you down the road. But it was great having you on today. I was thrilled to get to know you here a little bit today, and I'm sure our listeners will do the same. By the way, you've got your own podcast as well.
Yes. So it's called Status Go. It's actually for I'm the host for it. It's by Intervision Systems out of Santa Clara, California. It's their podcast, but the target audience for that are IT leaders who want to break out of the status quo, hence the name. So it's very action oriented. We drop an episode a week on a wide variety of topics, always with the focus on action.
Makes sense.
Anything else, Jeff, that you'd like to plug before we close up today's show?
Well, I encourage your listeners, if you're in a job transition or you're considering a job transition, I would encourage you to check out my book, Amplify Your Job Search. It's available on Amazon. It's also available on my website, which is jeffreystun.com. And I think it would give you a good tool set to go proceed with your job search. And I would love to connect with you. I'm a big connector on LinkedIn and Twitter. So if you're on those platforms and you want to connect, I'm really easy to find. I'm JTONINDY, JTON Indy. So would love to connect with all of your listeners. And thank you guys both for having me on the show. I've enjoyed it. Joe, I agree. It will not be our last conversation.
Looking forward to it.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Joe. And we'll put those notes about contacting Jeff in our show notes. So thanks everybody for joining the show, and we'll see you next time.